Okay, good evening. Um, in Parshas Miketz, when the brothers are standing in front of Yosef, but they don't know it's Yosef. They don't recognize him. He's viceroy. He's all dressed up as the viceroy. They probably wore makeup in those days, funny clothing. Whatever the reason, they didn't recognize him. And he recognizes them. And of course, he accuses them of being spies. Ragli Matem, he says. Right? And he accuses them of being spies. And of course, they're taken aback by this because they're anything but that. They came on friendly terms. They only wanted to buy food. And to be, you know what it's like, especially such an accusation. It's one thing to be called a thief or something like that, but to be called a spy, it's treason. You can be killed, shot by a firing squad or whatever they had in those days. And of course they were, no, we're not. We're from one father. The whole story, and then the rest of the story is basically about proving their innocence. And Yosef, keeps Shimon, and they go back home. And it's right there in the Chumash. Parshas Miketz. It's all there in black and white. You don't even need Rashi so much. And eventually the whole thing unfolds and takes a couple parshiyot before finally Yosef reveals himself in Parashat V'yigash. Actually, that's only one parsha later, right? Parashat, he reveals himself, Ani Yosef, and the brothers realize, and they all make up, and they basically live happily ever after until they all die. And no one seems to be bothered by the fact that he makes this accusation because we know he's trying to rectify them. We know it's all part of the rectification process. They misjudged Yosef. They thought he was no good. They thought he was dangerous for the future of the Jewish people. And it turns out that his dreams were in fact true. Everything that he dreamed about was from Shemayim, from God, and that's also why it changes from their hatred to jealousy, because hatred means not that you believe in the dreams, but that you can't stand the person. They're driving you nuts. You just can't wait to get rid of them. So how does it become jealousy? Because you realize he wouldn't be having these dreams if Shemayim wasn't sending them, but you have a difficult time admitting to yourself the truth. So you end up in this mode of jealousy instead, and they get rid of him. But the tikkun process is the same thing, and they have to keep showing how it's not what it seems. It's not what it seems. It's not what it seems. And this is the ongoing theme until finally, and then he sets up Binyamin in Parshas Miketz with the end of the parsha, up with the Gevia, the cup, the kos, and accuses them of stealing now. And of course, they're really feeling, boy, has got it to get us because we're so innocent and yet we're being found so guilty. And this happened in Jewish history a lot of times. And that's the story. But it's all part of the tikkun process. But it turns out that the tikkun process is including a lot more than just what's going on there, just with the brothers themselves. We skip ahead, right, to Parshas Shlach in Sefer B'Midbar, and there the fourth Parshas Lech, that Moshe Rabbeinu is sending the spies out to spy the land of Eretz Israel. Meragli, they're also spies, right? But here they actually are spies. They're actually being sent by Moshe Rabbeinu to spy the land, right? The Meragil is from the word regel because you usually in those days you walked a lot. You had to travel to be a spy because the whole idea of being a spy is you don't only belong there, you have to go there to be the spy. If you actually live there, unfortunately in Eretz Israel that's happened a few times already, but they are actual and real, authentic spies, seemingly sanctioned by Moshe Rabbeinu, and kind of by God, because he doesn't say don't go. He doesn't say go, but he doesn't say don't go. Right? And no connection seemingly, except for the fact that when Moshe sends them, it says they went right once, and then it says a second time when they came back, they went and they returned. So it mentions that they went twice. Most people don't pick up on these things. Most people just, the Torah does have a certain amount of poetic license. It does say things sometimes, and every once in a while, something superfluous might be superfluous, or at least seemingly superfluous, until we find a deeper reason for it. But the fact that it mentions that they went twice, it's a question if you're paying attention. Now, if you know to be medayik, if you know that the Torah does transmit all kinds of interesting insights and hints through words that it doesn't have to use, phrases it doesn't have to say, that this is a way to transmit information as well. So then, you pay attention like Rashi does. That's what Rashi does. Rashi asks these questions, even though, as he says over and over again, I only come for pshat. I only come to give the simple meaning. I could give you Kabbalah, I could give you, deep understanding, but I don't, it's not my job. That's other people's job. My job is just to smooth out the bumps so that you can read the Chumash, without getting stuck, and know a little bit more what's going on below the surface. So that's what Rashi does, and so Rashi does point it out, and he asks the question, and he has a drush, and even though Rashi doesn't always say where he's getting it from, although most of the time he does, that he is usually getting from somewhere. Otherwise, he will say, "I don't have a source for this. I didn't get this from anybody. This is what I heard, right? This is what I think," and which doesn't happen too often, and. There he brings in the Medrash, which says that it's coming to connect up their going with their coming back. Because when they came back, 10 of the spies came back with an evil report. So you might have thought, like you might have asked the question, at what point did they go from being kasherim, because that's what they're called at the beginning, kosher, seemingly righteous people, and they come back and do an evil thing? At what point did they change? At what point was the turnaround? Like what was it that, because we don't hear much about that. There's no point in the story where they go and they see something and they say, "Oh, we thought it was like this," but no, they go and they see things and they take note. It's only when they come back and they deliver the report do we actually finally hear what their intentions were, in terms of bringing back, the fruit and everything. And that's the extent of it. We don't really know where they turned. So Rashi says that's what the Torah is telling you about the going twice, coming to connect up the going with the coming back. Just like the coming back was with an evil report, evil intentions, likewise was the going with evil intention, which means that they didn't show anybody. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu, if Moshe Rabbeinu thought for 1 second, maybe he suspected, he probably did suspect because he gave him instructions. But if Moshe Rabbeinu thought for 1 second they're going to try and sabotage his mission, he probably would have canceled it. But they did a good job. And maybe they themselves didn't know either, because sometimes we can have this feeling inside, a negative feeling, a sense of reservation. For example, you talk to people about certain ideas or certain plans you have, and it's like a wall. They just keep coming back with all the things that are going to go wrong. They might end up going in the end. They might end up saying, "Yeah, fine, whatever," But in the meantime, they don't. "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go try that. Never tried that before, right?" Instead, it's like, "What about this? What about this?" So they might not even know what they're really saying is, "I don't want to go. I don't believe in this thing." So it could be the spies also didn't know what was in their heart of hearts until they went, because that's what happens in life a lot of times. And that's what God's doing in the entire time. God's always testing us by creating scenarios that rub us the wrong way, specifically to reveal to us what's going on inside of our heart of hearts. That's what an Asoyan is all about. That's what a test is all about. God knows what you're going to do, and any test he designs before you even were born, right? Before there was a chance to give you the test. He already knows, so you're not proving to him anything. You're revealing to yourself. The point of a test is to reveal to you what's going on inside of you. So a lot of times that's what situations do, scenarios do. That's why the divorce rate is so high in the world. If people didn't get married to get divorced, it happened over time. That's why business partnerships, they start off great and on a good note, and they fail. Or even treaties and partnerships between countries. People start off with certain intentions, and even they might not have deceitful intentions at the beginning, but as the situation goes and scenarios arise, then it brings it to the surface, right? And that's what happened to the spies. It brought it to the surface. But according to what Rashi's saying, according to Medrash, that at some point in time, and I'll tell you, if any time, probably, if you want to focus on any moment in time, it was probably the moment they left Moshe Rabbeinu's presence. And as long as they were in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu, as long as the spies were still in the camp and around Moshe, they were inspired to live to a higher level. They didn't feel the need to question it. Besides, life was going well. They were in the desert, exactly where they wanted to be. They had all their needs taken care of. So why complain? Why fetch? Even though they know that they're on their way eventually to Eretz Israel, nevertheless, in the meantime, everything is good. Maybe things can change. Only when the situation arose where now we have to go consider the possibility and start to prepare for making aliyah. So then that brought to the surface those latent emotions, and they had to deal with it. And, they dealt with it by rejecting the land. And of course, here we are today. We are here today in exile. Even in Israel, it's still exile. We're dealing with exile issues, all the time here, right? It's better than being in the diaspora, but still we have a lot of things we have to resolve in this country, including tremendous enemies surrounding us on all sides, which also includes Europe too, and even some places in the West, as well. So we're not there yet, and it's all because of the spies. If the spies had not come back and given their negative feedback and shaken the people up and scared them, right? Then we would have gone to Israel. Moshe probably would have been Mashiach, and we'd be sitting in the Messianic era right now without need for shirim like this. Instead, we'd be learning higher levels of Torah that we won't see again till basically the Messianic era and onward in the world to come. So the spies, that was everything. And we've been working on rectifying that the entire time, which is why it's so important. Whatever you think about Eretz Israel, especially if you're living here, but even more so if you're living in the diaspora, whatever you think about Eretz Israel, whatever reason you have for any negative feelings towards the land, keep it to yourself and work it through, because that's not going to fix the problem of the spies. And that's what we're fixing. The golden calf, more or less, we paid for it back then. We have a little, some, smaller amounts to pay over time, but it's now thousands of years later. Pretty much just paid off the golden calf. The only thing we didn't really pay off was the spies, which is why Eretz Yisrael today is such an central issue, one of the most important main issues that we have to deal with right now in history, because that's where it went wrong, and that's what has to be fixed up. And we'll be working on that until finally Mashiach comes and Kibbutz Galus takes place in completion, etc., etc. This is what Yosef was trying to bring out his brothers. He was trying to explain to them, this problem you have, this is not a local problem. This is a global problem. You are the fathers of the 12 tribes. I'm one of them, right? But at least 11 other tribes. You're the father. They're all going to descend from you. And they're going to get from you both physically, but especially spiritually. If you don't rectify what's going on now, here, what's wrong, this is going to come back to bite us later on in the future. We're going to be paying for this later on in the future when the Jewish people go to spy the land. And that's what the Arizal says, why Yosef chose Meraglim. He could have accused him of all kinds of things. He specifically chose Meraglim to hint to how in the future there are going to be spies, actually, and the same way that they misjudged Yosef and sent him into exile is the same way the spies are going to misjudge Eretz Israel and cause exile to the Jewish people for thousands of years after that. Even though we got back there, we got to the land, Baruch Hashem, eventually built the Beis HaMikdash, but it wasn't complete. We lost the Beis HaMikdash, we lost the land, came back, lost the land again, back and forth, and here we are fighting. I mean, amazingly, after thousands of years, we're back in the land, and it is our land, but we're still fighting for the ownership of it, to prove that we're the ones who it belongs to, and to protect ourselves in the land. All going back to Yosef. In fact, the Arizal he adds that not only is this connected, but is connected in an even deeper way. Because as I've discussed before in the past, there are two types of reincarnations. There's a the main reincarnation that most people are familiar with is when someone dies and the soul comes back in a new body, born into a new body. And that soul is necessary for the body, because if the soul were to leave the body dies. That soul is the life source of that body. So that's the classic concept of reincarnation. But there's a second version of reincarnation, which is also very common, not necessarily so common today, but once upon a time it certainly was. And that is a person who's already living. They have their own soul, which may have reincarnated, and more than likely did. They have their own soul, their life-giving soul, but it's possible for the soul of another person to come into their body, up to 3 extra ones, by the way, right? They come into their body usually either to guide them in life, to give them extra spiritual koiches, that they do mitzvahs better, to elevate them, usually always for a positive reason. It can also happen for a negative reason too, if someone's an evil person. They can to force them to go all the way down the road to evil. But most of the time we're talking about iburim, the word like muber is like pregnancy, because it's like a pregnancy, because a pregnancy is a different person inside the body of the mother, right? It's not the same person. So likewise, this ibor, the soul comes in, is not the person's soul. It's a guest soul, but it has the ability to help the person to achieve even more spiritual greatness. So it turns out, the Arizal explains, this is the reason why it mentions the going twice. Rashi pshat is pshat, and maybe a remes, right? But the Kabbalah behind those the extra going, is to tell us that there were two goings. There was the going of the spies themselves when they left the camp to go spy out the land of Eretz Israel, and there was the going of the souls of the tribes from Yosef's time, like the original fathers of the tribes, who came back as Gilgulim inside the spies of each tribe. In other words, Yehuda came back in Caliph, because he's from the tribe of Yehuda, right? And Dan came back in Dan, and Naphtali came back in Naphtali, and all the different heads of the spies came back, and there's all kinds of hints to it in the verses. He shows it's brilliant how this all works out, and how it's just incredible how that we can have this type of clarity. But so it turns out that they came. Why? Because it was a very dangerous mission spiritually, not physically so much, but spiritually. And the spies came back to help their descendants not to make the same mistake. But alas, they did anyhow. Because you'll see that Yosef's brothers themselves didn't fix up the problem in their lifetime. How do we see that? Because after Yaakov dies, the brothers go to Manasseh and tell Manasseh to tell Yosef that Yaakov told them to tell him not to harm him or harm them or take revenge for what they did to him after Yaakov's died. Because they assumed as long as Yaakov was alive, Yosef wouldn't lay a finger on them. But once Yaakov is gone, so he's the viceroy of Egypt, he can do whatever he wants. And they're worried about that. So Yosef hears this message and he says, there's no way in the world my father would ever have suspected me of doing such a thing. So therefore, they're making this up, which means they're afraid of me. And he says, "Ani tachas Elokim," right? Am I in place of God? Didn't you learn anything from the whole story of Shechem and what you did to me? How it was all divine providence, and it was, you tried to manipulate it, and it backfired on you. You didn't learn anything, And as a result of that, we go to exile, and that's why they cry. Yosef's not crying because he's personally offended. Oh, you hurt my feelings. You mistrust me. He understood where they were coming from. It's if the roles were reversed, it'd be hard not to feel the same way. But that's not why he's crying. He's crying because he knows, after all this work, after all this tikkun, they still didn't get it right. And now we're going to have to go down, or in Mitzrayim, but suffer hundreds of years of exile to fix up what they didn't fix up. And then we have the spies, the other end of the story. And as a result of that, the koyach to turn these real spies, the actual spies, around wasn't there or strong enough, because they come back anyhow and they give their evil reports. So that's the difference between Shlach Lecha and Lech Lecha, right? In this week's parsha, it's not a coincidence. They're very similar. Right? Hashem says, Lech Lecha, which literally means go to yourself, right? Lech Lecha, right? I mean, figuratively, we would just, go. Just that's a way of saying go. You should go, right? But the literal, and Kabbalah is always very literal, very completely literal. Lech Lecha means go to yourself. As Hashem is saying that, and just by the way, parenthetically, that you have to appreciate and understand that Avraham knew exactly where he was going. This is not Avraham's first trip. Avraham went at the age of 52, I believe it was, on his first pilot trip. Baruch Hu sent him to Eretz Israel. They left Ur Kasdim, and they stopped in Haran, and he left his family, everyone in Haran for a while. He went to Eretz Israel, Eretz Canaan at the time, traveled the land, and by the time this week's parsha begins, he's already 70 years old, and Hashem says, Lech Lecha, to the land I will show you. Of course, we all interpret it to mean that he didn't know where he was going. Not that there were a lot of options. It wasn't like there was America, Canada, England, right? Everything to the east they left behind. Hashem wasn't taking them back to the east, but was to the west. Not going south to Mitzrayim, right? That's certainly not the place they're not going north, right? Where are you going to go to? They really, Eretz Canaan is the only place that's suitable to go. And they knew about the land being important. There's no secrets here. So why does Hashem say to the land Ireka that I will show to you? Because he wasn't saying, surprise, Eretz Israel. No, that you already know. That we prepared for this. But until now, you only saw the land geographically. Let me show you what it looks like spiritually. That's the land I will show you. The land you could see on your own, you don't need me for it, that you saw up until now. But from this point onward, Lecha, I'm going to show you how this land is your path to fulfillment. This land is the way that you will become who you're meant to be in fulfillment. And that's what Lecha means. So then what's Shlach Lecha? Shlach Lecha implies something else. I mean, you cannot do Lecha without actually going. You have to be there physically and spiritually. How do we know this? Because Hashem starts out by saying to Abraham, he doesn't just say go, that would be enough. He says go and leave behind everything. Cut it off. Leave behind the place you were born. Very hard to do. Even if you didn't like the place you were born, it's very hard to do, because you are, used to it. The people, it's amazing how people have affection for things that even though they know they should get rid of these things, just walk away, they still have some kind of connection. It's very dangerous to get involved with things that you shouldn't be involved with because connections do develop. Ad kedei kach, we have a thing called the Stockholm syndrome, where Patty Hearst, was kidnapped and became one of them because she learned to be connected to them, even though they were kidnappers in the end. We have these psychological realities to be careful of, and how much more so things that are more, innate, more, what's the word? They're more subtle. But in any case, that's what Hashem says, Avram, this is not going to work unless you leave it all behind, because I need you there 100%. Lech lecha. You can't go to yourself if yourself is back there. Physically, you're walking around. That's clear, right? How many times you're doing something? I mean, and this happens in learning all the time. It can happen in davening. Sometimes, without even knowing it, you think you're involved in your davening. You think you're focusing. And either you wake up at some point and realize, I didn't, what were those words? I missed that important bracha, right? Or what's worse, you stop for 1 second and you can't remember where you were. And it was just 1 second ago. How can you forget where you were 1 second ago? The answer is because you weren't there 1 second ago. Your mouth was there, your brain was there on automatic pilot, right? But you, the individual, the consciousness, you weren't. You were someplace else, 60 miles away, 6,000 miles away, having breakfast, maybe, whatever. But you weren't focused. Focus yourself and be completely there. So Kosh Baruch Hu says to Avram Avinu, this is not going to work unless you're 100% there. So you have to cut yourself off completely. Interesting, by Shlachacha, of course, it's not like that. Because Shlachacha is the opposite. Shlachacha, they expect to come back to the camp. You can't say, go spy the land, but cut off this camp, right? Forget about your families you left behind. Forget about what's been going on all your life here. Go there as if you're going to live there, as if it's the only place you want to be, right? And forget about all of this. And then we'll talk about, whatever we're going to do next when the time comes up later on. You don't do that. So Shlachacha is not, it's the idea of a messenger. The idea of a messenger is that you don't go, right? The postman, he delivers the letter for you. Federal Express delivers the package for you. The whole reason for delivery service, so I don't have to go. If I can go next door, I don't call Federal Express to deliver my package one house away because I can go myself. You only need shlichus, right, when you have to extend yourself beyond your physical presence. But the spies didn't have to do that. They went to the land. They actually physically went there. But they didn't. That's the whole point. They didn't. Their bodies went, but not them. They stayed behind the camp. Understandably so. Again, Avraham is leaving Ur Kasdim. They tried to kill him. Okay, Haram is a better place, but still, it's not, the Kedusha there. He had Talmidim, his students. He was making, his students there. He and his wife, and the stories, and the Medrash, and it was working, but it's not the same as Eretz Yisrael. Abraham could feel the kedusha the moment he was there, or even close to the country. So it took a while for us to get used to it, but not him, not Avraham Avinu. Not once he already knew this is the place that Hakadosh Baruch Hu was going to promise him and his descendants. But the spies, they have an ideal life in the desert. Everything is going well for them. It's artificial. It's only temporary, but that's because that's what God said. They're hoping to make it, to extend the contract. They want to extend the rental, and the rent and stay in the desert longer. That's their dream until maybe the future. They probably knew at some point in time they had to go to Israel because the desert was not their final destination. It's clear, but not now, not today. And they're right. Not now, not today. That's why they were spies. They were 3 days away from getting there, but they were trying to understand what it would be like to make Aliyah today based upon where they were now, as opposed to where they might be 3 days' time. And that's really the problem with Bitachon and Emunah all the time. Most people have difficulty with bitachon because they fail to realize that what they are doing today, what they feel like right now, what the situation around them is right now, can change dramatically. I mean, how many times has this happened in the course of a life? At some point in time, if a person pays attention to what's going on, they see how so many times it looked hopeless, but there are factors they didn't take into account until Kosh Baruch Hu brought them into account. And you start to learn, let me wait and see. In a sense, that's what bitachon is. Let me wait and see. I'm not a prophet. I don't know the future. I can't predict that much and be right about it, right? But I do know one thing, that God promised me if I trust in him, he'll take care of me. It'll all come up for the good in the end. So just because I can't see how I'm going to get better in this situation, how I'm going to have a refuah, whether it's physically, whether it's spiritually, whether it's financially, right? Doesn't mean that God doesn't already know it, especially since the Gemara says that God always makes the trufah, he always makes the medicine before the illness, before he inflicts a person with something, he already has the medicine in the medicine cabinet, somewhere that the person should be able to have, why do people die? Okay, yeah. It's not so black and white, clear cut, and as simple as we make it sound, but that's the general rule. And for all the people that it doesn't work out for, there are many, and maybe even many more from it does work out. But you don't always hear about those stories. The personal people keep to themselves. But the idea of Shlach is that Kosh Baruch Hu was actually telling them in advance, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. Yeshua, he got a yud. He got the yud from Sarah's name, right? When Sarai became Sarah, Rashi brings down this Parashat, I believe. When Sarai became, Sarah, so the yud came and complained to Hashem and said, well, this is not fair. I was attached to a tzedekis, and now you take me off, and I'm just in limbo hanging around. So the Yud would not stop complaining until the Kosh Baruch Hu said, well, in the future, Moshe will change Hoshea's name to Yeshua, and you'll be the Yud that will start his name. So you got a better seat, right? Because in the past, you were just the last letter. Now you'd be the first letter of the Manhigador, the leader of the Jewish people, Yeshua ben Nun. So he was happy with that. Avram's name was changed from Avram to Avraham. He got an extra. He didn't lose anything. He got an extra letter, so it's not a problem over there, right? But Yeshua was prepared for what happened. But first of all, he was the student of Moshe Rabbeinu. You can't do any better than that. And he got the yud to add to that kedusha. What about Eliezer? No, sorry. What about Kalev? I just gave the answer away, right? What about Kalev? Right? Kalev, he went. It says, and he went to Hebron, to Machpelah, where Avram was buried, and he threw himself on the grave, and he prayed to Avraham, listen, I'm with a bunch of people who are going to cause certain problems when they go back to the camp. Protect me from these people. I don't want to be influenced by them. I don't want to be dragged down by them. Protect me from them. So he got Avram's help. So why not Yitzchak? Why not Yaakov? Why Avram specifically? Oh, because, again, the Arizal explains the same section, right, in Shar Gilgulim, that Kalev actually was a reincarnation of Eliezer, Avraham's servant. He was the reincarnation. So it was a servant going back to his master and asking for help. But you'll say to me, how's that possible? Eliezer was a Canaanite. He was a Canaanite. And the Canaanites are cursed. Noah did that in last week's Parsha. And Abraham, his family line is blessed. And Avraham says to Eliezer, because Eliezer wanted his daughter, who was a tzaddikus, to marry Yitzchak, who was a tzaddik. And Avram said, it's a nice shidduch, but the problem is that he's blessed and she's cursed because she comes from Canaan, and that's just the rules of the game. So Eliezer accepted that. He was a tzaddik, he understood. But, says Arizal, when Eliezer then went to look for a shidduch for Yitzchak by going to Lavan's house, so there Lavan, who came from Abraham's side of the family, blessed him. He said, Baruch haba, B'Shem Hashem, something like that effect, right? He blessed Eliezer. And since we see in this week's Parsha that anybody who comes from Abraham's family can give blessings, real blessings, so as a result of that, Eliezer was blessed, and that transformed him spiritually. It schlepped him from the side of those who are cursed to the side of those who are blessed. So Eliezer actually became now shaykh. I don't know his daughter. His daughter was already born an adult, so I don't think she was able to change at that point in time. But Eliezer did, and because of that, he was able to reincarnate into Kalev later on, and that's why he goes to Abraham's grave. So both Kalev and Yeshua, they have protexia. Kalev has the protection of Avram Avinu, the schools of Avinu, and Yeshua had the Yud from Sarah, plus the fact he was a Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu. But the other 10 spies, no. Clearly, they failed their mission. And as a result of that, the nation had to spend an extra 39 years in the desert and thousands of years in exile because we're still paying for that. So this is what Baruch he was warning them about. Shlach Lecha, meaning that you're not going to even go. You think you're going. You think you're going to spy the land, but you're not. Your bodies will go. You'll walk north, south, east, west. You'll bring back some produce. You'll bring back some stories, all of that, but it won't be you. You are going to stay behind in the camp. If you were to go, you, like Yeshua and Kalev, you'd come to understand the importance of Eretz Israel, and you'd also want to move there. You say, boy, we didn't expect this. Is wonderful. The Medrash brings a story, mashal. What was this like? And the story goes like this: that basically there was once a princess who decided, she'd met all these other princesses, and they were all arrogant and feeling entitled, and she didn't like this. She was a very good midos person, and she wanted to marry somebody who would be like her. So she got this idea to marry a commoner. So she sent her guards out. She said, specific instructions: go find a commoner, somebody who's well respected, who's got good traits. He's obviously princely in his lifestyle, but he's just not princely in money. Find someone like that. I'd like to meet him because maybe, in fact, I'll marry him and I'll elevate him in status, and we'll both live happily ever after. So guards follow their orders. They go out there and they check around. It takes a little time, and sure enough, they find a certain commoner who fits the bill. And they go over to this commoner. They introduce themselves and tell them what the princess has said, and they invite him to the palace to meet the princess. And he says, "What's wrong with the princess?" What do you mean what's wrong with the princess? Nothing's wrong with the princess. Well, why would she want to marry someone like me? I'm just a commoner. She can marry people from dukes and things like that. And there must be some reason why she wants to marry me. Maybe no one else wants to marry her. No, everything's fine. I have to meet her first. I just can't say yes like this. I got to know for sure. So the guard said, "Oh, whatever, you're a little surprised," but they go back to tell the princess, that this is what he had. They found somebody, but this is what he answered, and the princess taken aback. On one end, she probably could understand. It's just a story anyhow, right? Understand a bit, but on the other hand, it's like, what do you care? I'm a princess. You're a commoner. You marry me, your life is going to change. If we don't talk to each other the rest of the year, right, you're still going to have, a princely lifestyle. So, I'll tell you what, let him come. Let him come, right? Now, it turns out the princess is beautiful. She's a wonderful, woman, and she's a fantastic catch for anybody. And what happens is that she gets dressed up, but she wears clothing of veilless, of mourning. She dresses in black from head to toe, black veil, the whole thing, right? And the commoner comes in, all dressed nicely, prepared himself. He takes one look at the princess and he says, "Ooh, this is not for me. This is too depressing." And he rocks out and he walks, leaves it behind. And of course, when she's gone, takes it all off. And Chazal say that this is what Eretz Yisrael did too. That Kosh Baruch Hu says to the Jewish people, right, I'm going to give you a land that is so precious and so valuable that you don't deserve it, but because you come from Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak and Yaakov and and you're living by Torah, mitzvahs and all that, so I'm going to give you this land, you and your descendants henceforth, right? And what do the Jewish people say? They don't say, thank you so much. We can't wait to get there and start living our lives there. We want to see it first. What's the catch? We want to know what it's like before we sign on the dotted line. So Hashem says, you want to see the land first? Okay, come on in, right? So he dresses it up in big day of Vela, so to speak. He has the people bearing, people all the time, and the fruits are larger than normal. And so they get this wrong impression of the land, and they think this is not what we want. This is not for us. We like the desert much better. And in fact, the land is wonderful, absolutely marvelous, more than you could ever hope for. Yeah, it takes work because it's up to us to transform it from Canaan to Eretz Yisrael. There's a reason why the Torah still refers to it as Eretz Canaan, even after the Jewish people are on their way there. It doesn't call Eretz Yisrael yet. Why is it not called Eretz Yisrael? Because we have to make it into Eretz Yisrael. How do we do that? By getting rid of the tumah, by getting rid of the impurities, by getting rid of the evil, by living by Torah mitzvahs on the land. That's how we do it. And as we do that, we draw the sparks out of the realm of impurity. We transform it spark by spark into the land of Israel. As any place in Israel that remains like Canaan, by definition, is Canaan. Where you make it like Eretz Yisrael, it's Eretz Yisrael. And when Mashiach comes, we'll complete the process, and the land will come to complete fulfillment. Almost like what happened in Chizkiah's time. It came very close, but not completely. It was almost Mashiach in the end. But that's the difference. That's what Shlach Lecha meant. Hashem is saying, you're not going to yourself, not Lech Lecha. You're not going to yourself because yourself is not there. You're leaving yourself behind, which means you're not even interested in any changes that might occur to you positively along the way. You're not interested in learning anything. It's like the same thing. You get into an argument with somebody whose mind is set on their conclusion for whatever reason. It could be they're defensive, could be they can't handle the truth, but their mind is set. And you get into debates. As you get older, you start to realize a lot of these arguments you have along the way, they're just not worth it. They don't go anywhere. You end up with as much opposition at the end, and maybe more sometimes than you started off with, because the person wasn't going to listen. In fact, someone told me this week, actually based on the Rambam, that even Avraham realized this after a while. In the beginning, he came on, smashing idols and say, this stuff is a lie. It's not real. There's only one God. He made the world. I'll tell you who he is. He's waiting to hear from you, right? And all of this is sheker, legamre. Get rid of it. It's a waste. It's idol worship. What is Zorah? What happened? They threw him into a fiery pit. How do you know? How do you know? Because think about it. If it's the real God, if God is really who Avram says he is, then he runs the whole world, including me. I stand to lose everything if I object, to his existence, and I live opposite to that existence. So ask the question: how do you know? Right? And they don't do that. Instead, they say, into the pit. We're going to burn you to death. Right? If your God's alive, he'll save you. And he did. And it says that day a lot of people converted to Avram's way of life because of the miracle, which God did not want to do because it takes away free will. But it didn't turn the world around. Even the 70 souls that Avraham made in Haran, after he died, Chazal say they disappeared. Because as long as the Rebbe was there, they were Talmidim. But once the Rebbe was gone, it wasn't Tophus. It didn't catch. So what did he do instead? He focused instead on just developing a family that could one day stand before Kodesh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai and receive Torah and mitzvah, say Nasa v'Nishma, right? Go through, and Mitzrayim was a part of the process. That's what we see in this week's parsha. He says, "But Ma'ida," Hashem says, "Well, because you're going to pay a price. You're going to be fashioned. You're going to be formed into a nation through the crucible that's Egypt, in order to become that nation, that Torah nation, at one day." And even then, the process wasn't finished. Clearly, 1/5 left Mitzrayim, 4/5 died in Makas Choshech. And after that, the other one-fifth more or less died in the desert, except for the women and some of the Levim. It's been going on like this for thousands of years. And here we are, 3,300 and whatever years later, right? And the same broch, as we were back then. We have Reform, conservative, Orthodox, reconservative, and within Orthodox, we have this group, and fighting against ourselves. It's an absolute mess because we're not finished yet. And it all comes down to Lech Lecha. That was where it all began. You have to go to yourself. You have to be there. You have to be 100% present. You can't do mitzvahs half-heartedly. You can't live by Torah half-heartedly. You have to be completely there. You daven, you have to be completely there. Obviously, we're human beings and we get tired. Our bodies sometimes are overwhelming and it's just so hard to focus. You have a mitzvah to do, so you do it the best you can. God understands. He knows who He made us. He understands. But are you trying? Did you at least try to focus? You couldn't, fine, but did you at least try to focus, or do you just give up, right? And you go about your mitzvahs every day. I have to do it because I can't not do it. I'll be thrown out of the community. I won't be able to marry my children because they'll see me, as I got to do it, somehow. But do I believe? Is it Judaism on the inside, or is it Judaism on the outside? Is it external or internal too? That's Lecha. We're all going through history, having to decide from day to day, sometimes from hour to hour, are we Shlach Lecha or Lech Lecha? That's what we have to decide, right? Are we present? Are we committed, completely there? With the mission that we're supposed to do? Do I even know what that mission is? You'd be surprised how few people actually know what that mission is, and how few, if fewer yet, know what that mission is on the deeper level. Just go with the flow. Thousands of years later, just going with the flow. But that's what God's going to ask you at the end, right? There's different ways of asking the question. Yom Adin, right? Ani Hashem. Sometimes that's all he's going to say. Ani Hashem, and that itself will be the judgment. But also, it's like basically the same idea as Lech Lecha or Shlach Lecha, right? Did you go to yourself? Did you use Torah and mitzvahs in the life I gave you as an opportunity to refine yourself spiritually, to be 100% committed, to become one with Torah, mitzvahs, and me? Or did you just send a proxy? Your body. You were there, you went to minyan, like you're supposed to. You put on your tefillin. But were you there when you put it on? Or is it a golem in the end? That's the test that everybody goes to. And everybody has their own version of Eretz Yisrael. There is the physical land, yes, for sure. And it's so valuable. It's hard to even, it deserves many shurim on its own. But there's also the Eretz Yisrael conceptually. That's the land that we're all going to. This world, next world. It's the one we build through our commitment to God, to our mitzvahs, by doing lechacha and not shlach lecha. Have a great Shabbos.